Hey, thank you for tuning in. This is going to be take 2, because take 1, I recorded with the wrong microphone. But today we're going to be talking about Silent Hill, A Short Message, The Short Message. I think it's a short playable game / demo / teaser that was recently shadow dropped at Sony's State of Play January 31st, 2024. I had no idea that this thing was coming out, and I decided to give it a look because I've had sort of Silent Hill curiosity in the past. I played a few of the games, and I thought it would be fun to talk about. And I'm trying to put out more content this year, so what better place to start than with a nice 2-hour, hour and change, small playable game. So yeah, I played it, I streamed the whole thing, which is new for me. Again, it's only 2 hours, not, I guess, the biggest accomplishment, but I wanted to go into what I think they did right, what I think could have been improved, and just talk a little bit about the state of horror games in 2024 in general. So without further ado, let's take it away. I think the first thing that is important to bring up is 2014's PT, the playable teaser, which was a Kojima Productions short game that was created and released to drum up interest in a new Kojima created Silent Hill game called Silent Hills with an S. That was kind of a huge cultural deal at the time, the way it shadow dropped, the way that it was one of those sort of guerrilla style puzzles where they expected that the internet would take a week to have cracked it. It was actually solved, I think, in the first 24 hours, and the reveal, once the puzzle of the game was solved, was this announcement of a Silent Hill game that was going to be Kojima directed with in partnership with Guillermo del Toro and starring Norman Reedus, which was, he was kind of just blowing up in Walking Dead at the time, so that was sort of a weird thing to see. And it's funny to note, when you look back, that how much of Death Stranding feels like it came out of that project, Silent Hills, whatever that was going to be. A lot of that work, I think, ended up expressing itself in Death Stranding. That was kind of cool. Anyway, so the short message is definitely trying to evoke this same sort of cultural vibe, right? It is a first-person Silent Hill game, of which there have only been 2 if you count PT and Silent Hill 4 to some extent. It features a character wandering around these sort of dark corridors in this hotel space and looping through it, so at several points in the game, you kind of start over at the beginning and go through the same corridors, and it's very non-Euclidean. You have a lot of times that doors will lead into spaces they shouldn't or would loop back on themselves. So there are definitely references to that. This also comes out in the months or weeks at this point before the release of Silent Hill 2, the remake by Bloober Team. And so while it's probably a publicity stunt in order to draw attention to that game, it raises its own questions about what the future for Silent Hill is going to be, and I think it's probably also a test bed for what they want to do with it. So it's interesting in a lot of ways. I'm going to talk about what I liked, and then talk about what I didn't like, and then wrap it up. So yeah, let's start with the good. Let's start with the things that you can point out about this project that I think show that they're on the right track with this. I will say that maybe the ways that I think this would lead to a good future for the Silent Hill franchise. For one thing, and a friend who was watching me stream pointed this out, there were almost no jump scares in this game, which may seem like a small detail, but personally, I'm not the biggest horror media fan in general, but I think if Silent Hill has made an identity for itself, it really has built itself around this idea of psychological horror and sort of psychologically surreal horror. So horror that is based on a person's frame of mind and the deep monsters that, they create for themselves versus an external threat like zombies or haunted animatronics that are going to like jump up in your face. I think there was only one point in the game that I remember actually having like feeling a jump scare. You can, if you disregard sort of the main monster scenes in the game, most of the game is just little creepy things happening. You're exploring a very unsettling area. There was one moment when you turn around and suddenly you're surrounded by these scarecrow things. They're not technically monsters, but I did go, whoa, okay, a bit of a jump scare.
It was these guys.
Shadow Worm. Oh, hi. Okay. Are you internet trolls? Is that what's going on here? I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, just step around you. Fascinating. Okay. The reason I think that's important to mention is because, as I was getting to, jump scares are kind of fundamental in a lot of the modern trending horror games out there. Jump scares are how you get Twitch screamers to jump out of their seats and have these goofy reaction shots, and that's kind of what propels this genre. So having a game that sort of eschews that approach for more of like a mood piece, I think that's really brave. It would be very easy to just like litter this thing with, creepy Halloween costumes jumping up in your face. It didn't really do that so much. I also think it's worth pointing out that there is no appearance of Pyramid Head in this entire thing, and I think that's very strong. Pyramid Head is definitely like the Silent Hill mascot. He's done a lot of really goofy game crossovers. He appeared in a Bomberman game, if that tells you anything. And so I think it's very easy for publishers to say, oh, this is the thing people recognize, we'll throw it in. Normally that might not seem like a big deal, like, Final Fantasy VII's Chocobos, Final Fantasy's Chocobos are a great example. You just throw them in anywhere, and they're always a joy. In Silent Hill, this character, Pyramid Head, is a monster that represents a very specific thing for very specific characters in that game. And so when you see him pop up in other contexts, it's a very visually striking character, but it does show that, it's surface deep. When you take him out of his context, he stops making any kind of sense beyond just being a really cool character design. So the fact that we didn't get a Pyramid Head in this, I think, is a good sign. They're trying to do something that will stand on its own legs, which I appreciate. I think it was visually great. Like, I think the power of the PS5. It's a beautiful looking game. They use a lot of cool tricks that I enjoy that are, for a walking simulator, still feel pretty engaging. There's a really clever and subtle point where you are sort of going down memory lane and your character is reading a journal entry, and when you come out of the journal entry, suddenly you are much shorter. You've been transported back to like little girl height, I guess. And it's a subtle thing. I didn't even notice it right away, but very unsettling, very creepy. They do a lot of fun stuff like that. There's a specific moment near the end where you turn around and start running, and during the turnaround transition, literally while you're spinning the camera, the room right behind you is completely transformed into this hellish labyrinth. That was kind of impressive too. There were slight moments of framiness, but I think for the most part, it uses the technology to really good effect. And I think that last and probably most importantly, the game is using the tools of Silent Hill, the things that made Silent Hill unique, to tell its story. And what I mean by that is that the game uses the game's horror is very internally focused. It's very concerned with this character and her trauma, and all of the horrible things that you see in the gameplay are reflections of that. Which, again, if I think Silent Hill has an identity, that is it. So it's nice to see them playing up those elements rather than relying on, over-the-shoulder third-person shooting. Not that that's bad gameplay, but it is something that is very Resident Evil, and when you look at the trailers for the new Silent Hill 2 remake, to me they look very Resident Evil 4. Which, we'll see. I'm not going to make any prior judgments on that, but I think that, Resident Evil 4 is a great game. They're great action games. I think the gameplay in the old Silent Hills and the old Resident Evils is modern audiences would find it repugnant, but I think that it went a lot further to actually creating a horrifying gameplay experience. But that's a rant for another time. So, in any case, I think that's all the good stuff I have to say, so let's move on to the other stuff. I'll preface this by saying that I think a lot of these takes are going to be very personal. I did ask some of the people that I was playing with, what they thought about it and if they had different perspectives on it, because they were from wildly different age groups and life experiences, and we got some good feedback. Personally, I did not like the characters. I did not, not that I think they were badly written, although I don't think the writing was great, but also I think just from a perspective, I have very little empathy for the cast of characters that we're introduced to, right? The plot is largely concerned with 3 teenage girls in this depressed area in Germany, and it deals with themes of social anxiety, depression, self-hatred, survivor's guilt, social media addiction, bullying, and while I think that these are valid topics to explore, I don't have a lot of, I can't immediately empathize with characters struggling with these particular things. I have no love for the teenage demographic, and I kind of, as someone who's been unplugged from social media for going on 2 decades now, it makes it really hard for me to try to empathize with characters that are so wound up in this sort of social anxiety and this need to be, seen and appreciated by those around them. So in that sense, I think personally I had a bit of a mental block connecting with the characters. The writing is very poetic in a lot of ways, in ways that I feel like maybe are translation issues, but ways that made me, I don't know, maybe cringe a little bit here and there. I will say that for being a story about all of these characters, these very young teenage female characters, I didn't feel like the topic was coming from a place of empathy. It felt like it was coming from a place of research. It felt like the writers did their research and, read some books and some, Wikipedia articles, and they included all of this stuff, but it didn't feel like it was coming from a place of personal understanding of these topics. And maybe that's subjective. Like I said, I have a hard time empathizing with these topics, but this is sort of a very Japanese approach to writing that I bump into a lot. It felt very constructed, if that makes any sense, versus something like this is a personal story that we want to tell. And it's not necessarily bad, but when the subject matter is this personal and this, shooting for something this real, I think it helps to have empathy in your writing. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but sometimes it's the difference between crying and not crying at a heartrending scene in a movie. Sometimes it comes from a place that feels honest, and sometimes it comes from a place that feels performative. This one felt fairly performative most of the time. So another example of this, I would say, one of the plots in the story is the protagonist's relationship to this girl Maya, who is a Japanese girl who is also a graffiti artist and features fairly prominently. There are several scenes, cutscenes specifically, that are live action interactions with this character Maya. Maya has a very poetic, dramatic way of talking, and there are multiple scenes where she is saying very flirtatious things with the protagonist, or things that as an English speaker I would take to be flirtatious, to the point where I thought that the story was about sort of this closeted gay relationship, and maybe that was part of the turmoil.
I want to show the hidden side of girls. Their impulses. Their urges.
I don't think that sounds the way you think it sounds.
What are you hiding inside? Don't worry about what people think. Be proud.
But by the end of it, it becomes clear that that was not really intended. If you can read it into it, like maybe it's supposed to be there in a subtle way, but there are several things that happen that are revealed that make it seem very clear that this was not their intention, right? The Maya character has a boyfriend who seems to be part of her eventual trauma. There are times when she's speaking where you find articles written about her where she's quoted, where she's using similar language but in a much broader sense, and talking about like young women in general. So it was the kind of thing where it was a little bit misleading, and looking back at sort of the footage and re-listening to it, it seems just kind of tone deaf, right? It seems kind of almost like a translation error. Like this was written in a way to be poetic and deeply personal and meaningful, and to sort of convey that this character has this deep well of sympathy for all women struggling. But the end result was it comes off as incredibly flirtatious, and not in a way that felt intentional by the end, but in a way that just felt kind of tone deaf. You know, that could be my read anyway. But yeah, so writing, I think writing was the thing that was holding this back the most for me. It would be easy to also attack the gameplay, although I think for what it is, it's fine. I'm not a big walking sim guy, but I think it was engaging. There was one point that felt like it was actually a gameplay challenge. There's a midpoint where there's this light puzzle solving aspect. There's a locker room and you have to like find a code that's been hidden around this hallway set. And there are several moments throughout the thing where you are being chased by this monster. The non-pyramid head is a monster of their own design for this story, and I think it is a similarly iconic look, but I don't think it has the same weight as a pyramid head. Still, you know, I applaud them for like doing their own thing. And we, over the course of the game, sort of learn what the monster represents. And that's kind of cool too. Oh, what was I talking about? The walking sim. So yeah, gameplay wise, I think it serves what it's trying to do. The act of just bumping around in the dark, trying to find clues and things, is perfectly fine for a short 2-hour experience. Besides the puzzle in the locker hallway, there is one section at the end. So there's several sections where you're being chased by this monster, but to me they felt very linear. It felt like just keep holding forward and eventually you make it out. Not to say I never got caught. I think I got caught maybe once or twice during these opening sections. There's like 2 of these chase scenes. They're a little tense, but they don't feel scary in a traditional sense. Like they're going for the alien isolation. I guess Alien didn't invent this, but you're being chased through the dark by a big scary monster is a classic trope in these games. But oftentimes the horror of those situations is your agency and understanding that like your choices are going to determine whether or not you get caught. And in these sections, they mostly feel you just hold forward on the stick, try not to get caught on a wall or anything, you're going to do fine. The exception is in the last big one at the end of the game. It opens up and becomes like a literal legitimate maze that's actually quite large. And in it, you have to find a bunch of these Easter eggs. I mean, we'll just call them items. They're touchstones from this character's past. You have to find them and interact with them. And you need to find all of them in this maze while you're being chased, and then get to the exit. And you need to do that. And in that maze, you are given sort of like turnarounds like areas where you can sort of kite the monster. So you actually do have to be aware of where the monster is, and you have to be reactive, and you have to sort of memorize this maze to a certain extent. And that was legitimately a bit challenging. I think it took me like 5 or 6 attempts to finish it. So in that sense, I won't say that it's a total mindless, linear hallway game. I do think it, passes the game test by the end there. And yeah, so I think for what it is, it's fine, but I will also say that this was suitable for a 2-hour experience. I could see maybe a 5-hour game. I would definitely not play like a very long game with these mechanics, just because I think the novelty wears off pretty quick. There's also the challenge of a game where if you, if you're forced to reconfront the monster over and over and over again, it quickly becomes less scary. You just sort of become numb to it, and you sort of like focus on the challenge aspect of it. And then soon, even that just gives way to boredom and frustration. So given that, I think this game hit the balance point just right. That ending sequence was tense enough that I could see it filtering some people, especially if you were really scared or creeped out by what the game was doing. But not impossible, and with a little focus and drive, I think it's definitely very attainable. Okay, in conclusion, I don't think I'm a fan of this particular game, but I am a fan of the approach. As I said up near the top, this game could have been very different. There are a lot of very popular horror games on the market today that are playing to an audience of streamers, of young kids, of creepypasta fans, and not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it is a crowded market, and I do think that the approach that they're taking here is better than that. I do prefer it to doing another over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, but with like ooky monsters instead of zombies. It did feel like they were shooting for something that was distinct in the marketplace, so I appreciate that. If they made a longer game that had a little bit more gameplay mechanic to it, that had focused on sort of a different cast of characters that I personally found more relatable, I'd be 110% in. Feedback from the other people who played with me, and shout out to you guys if you're listening to this, but I got some good feedback, some similar feelings that the writing maybe was punching above its weight class. The topics that they were tackling might not necessarily be appropriate for the skill level of the people who were writing for it. But they did think the story was interesting and the characters were interesting. They did not find it scary, at least I assume not compared to the modern Five Nights at Freddy's batch of streamable games. But I will say what kind of redeems it for me a little bit is that it was interesting. Even if I didn't fully enjoy the characters, I enjoyed the cool effects, I enjoyed the setting and the set dressing. I enjoyed that the story had themes, and that those themes were represented symbolically in the monsters and in the events that transpired. There was one particular touch I wanted to mention that felt very Silent Hill to me that I really liked. At the beginning of every one of these loops, when you wake up, the first thing you see is like a circle drawn on a wall, and it starts out kind of scratchy and black and small, and then by the third or fourth, by the last rotation through this nightmare scenario, the circle is huge and it's been like drawn large, and there's like blood dripping from it. And I won't spoil it, but you do learn what exactly this circle is in the context of the story. But that, like, the visual of that was very striking. It's this very archetypal, like, I don't know, Freudian horror, that is like, feels like the best parts of Silent Hill were these great artistic representations of like deep primordial mental horror. And things like that. I was just like, okay, that's pretty cool. More of that. Don't have to, jump the shark or anything. It really didn't do that. And I think for that reason, it's going to probably not find as many fans as it could. But hey, power to it. Anyway, so that's my long rant on Silent Hill: The Short Message. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know. Leave me a message. I'm going to try to do more of this stuff in the future because it's fun. But yeah, your encouragement could help because I'm notoriously flaky when it comes to these kinds of production projects. They take a lot of time and effort to put together, and sometimes that's hard to come by. So if you are interested in hearing me ramble about more video games or in watching me stream, leave a message. The information is on the whatever social media you're finding this on. I stream on Twitch, and I stream all kinds of crazy stuff. Probably a lot of it you haven't seen streamed recently, and that's because I'm way behind the curve and because I'm probably streaming a lot of stuff that isn't actually that streamable, but to heck with it, right? So keep an eye out for that, and until next time, consume your media responsibly. All right, I'm out.